everybody, if I could get your attention and have your eyes in this direction. We're getting ready to start our breakout session in this room. If you are looking for the breakout session that is not going to discuss the pregnancy termination policy, you are in the wrong room. So, all right, we're going to be passing out a handout, which essentially is the policy document that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. And in your program, you will see that the speaker slated for this presentation is a Cherie Daniels. However, Cherie was in a car accident, she and her husband, pretty serious accident, but the good news is that she is at home, they are at home recovering. The stand-in speaker is going to be Dr. Ted Hamilton. And one of his great gifts is the fact that he's really good at being a minute man. So we're going to spend some time with Dr. Hamilton talking about the Adventist policy statement with regard to ending pregnancies. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you looked at the news last night, but a document was leaked from the Supreme Court, and that document suggests that the Supreme Court will be overturning Roe v. Wade, and therefore will leave in the hands of the states whatever happens with regard to the abortion conversation, and possibly opening the door to a whole domino effect of other things. We're not here to discuss that necessarily, okay? So we're going to try and keep our focus narrowed to the conversation with regard to what Advent Health, what the Adventist health system would like to do with regard to the subject. So this morning you were in the room and you heard the long introduction with regard to Ted's journey. And I just want to share that I'm also a friend of Ted and grateful to be a friend of Ted. He's had his hand in my career journey, and I'm blessed because of it. So I'm going to hand over the mic to you and let you do things in your own way.
Okay.
Ted Hamilton, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Listen, guys, there's like a dozen of us in here. Nobody has sat at this table the whole time we've been here. Can we all just, take these chairs and put them around in a smaller circle here where we can hear and see each other and see the expression on the face and just chat? This is not going to be a prepared presentation. Pull them out, make yourself comfortable. But I feel a lot better about having you up close and personal. I might not. Oh, you need the microphone for whatever? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. I hate it when people do that to me in class or church or wherever it is. But I think it'll work for this. So, the phone rings in the office. Often as not, it's Dr. Peter Landless, who's the medical director at the General Conference. And he'll say, Ted, I got this call from someone who's really concerned about all the abortions being done in Adventist hospitals in North America. Would you mind talking to whoever that person is? Now, that doesn't happen every day, but it probably happens 2 or 3 times a year. And so I call him, and I introduce myself. And I said, I've heard you have some concerns about abortion in Adventist hospitals. I said, I want to ease your mind. No Adventist hospital in North America performs elective abortions, period. Paragraph, end of story. We don't do that. Well, I've been online, and I know Washington Adventist does abortions. And I know there's a hospital in Hawaii that does abortions. Well, you can go online right now, and you can find where Washington Adventist Hospital did abortions about 50 years ago. There's a group of OBGYN docs there that continued doing abortions for a period of time before that was halted there. There was also a period of time, and Alex, I don't recall when the relationship changed, but Advent Health, what's now Adventist Health, managed Castle Memorial in Hawaii for a period of time before it became fully part of the organization, and there was a group of OB docs that did abortions 50 years ago or 40 years, a long time ago. And I said, so if you're talking about that data that is multiple decades old now, there's some fire where there's smoke in regard to, there was at one time, but those embers are long dead and gone, and we do not do abortions. I said, we do terminations of pregnancy. In doing that, we follow the Adventist Church's guidance from a paper that was produced and approved by the General Conference in session in 1992. That was a paper that was authored by a group of Adventist, an international group of 30 or 40 people, led by one Gerald Winslow, at the behest of, what's his name now? He was one of my residents at Lumley, Albert Whiting, Dr. Albert Whiting, an internist who was at that time the medical director of the General Conference. And they convened a group that met for probably a little over 2 years, developed a paper, refined that paper. There were on that committee people who spoke English and people from countries where English was not their primary language. There were women, there were men, there were church people, there were healthcare people, there were, I mean, it was really a solid group of people. That document, in short, I won't go into all the details about it, but it said that this is a very difficult issue, but there are complex circumstances under which an Adventist hospital will consider the termination of a pregnancy, and those circumstances include these three. One is an imminent threat to the life or health of the mother. Two is a diagnosed fetal condition that's incompatible with life outside the womb. And the third is documented rape or incest. Now, that was the church's statement, approved by the General Conference in session. Beginning about 5 years ago, the Biblical Research Institute of the General Conference was asked by senior administration at the General Conference to look at that document and consider whether changes needed to come to that document. That document went through some, 14, 16 iterations. And at some point along the way, Dr. Landless convened a group of representatives from the 5 health systems at the General Conference to meet with the Biblical Research Institute and address those issues. The Biblical Research Institute folk are they're theologians, and they are good theologians. They are also specialized in theology. Difficult issues have a tendency to be starkly differentiated by solely scriptural interpretation in the absence of practical reality. Does that make sense? So there were, on this particular day, which was probably 4 years ago now, probably 4 years ago, a group of 7 physicians from around Adventist healthcare and 7 people from the Biblical Research Institute were seated at a table at the General Conference. It was really curious to me. When we all took our seats, I didn't know hardly anybody in the room. The 7 people from the BRI sat on one end of the table, and the doctors from around the system sat at the other end of the table. I mean, it's just the way it happened. There were no nameplates. That's just the way it happened. And it was a fascinating afternoon of discussion. At one point, Dr. Alan Handysides, who was the medical director of the GC prior to Dr. Landless, and who was also an obstetrician who had delivered some 10,000 babies in his career, looked directly at one of the BRI representatives and said, okay, let's swap perspectives. You be the doctors and I'll be the church. He said, you have a woman who comes to your hospital. She's very ill. She's mid-term pregnancy, 4 or 5 months. And it becomes clear that if we don't get that fetus out, she's going to die. What are you going to do, doctor? No, I'm not a doctor. That's not my problem. So ultimately, that paper, with some modifications, was approved. It didn't have the 3 things there anymore: the rape, incest, the imminent threat to the life of the mother or the infant unable to survive outside the womb. But it did say something to the effect, there exist complex situations which are best left to the discretion of the mother and her doctor, and left it there. And that gave us in healthcare enough comfort that we can live with that. So this year in Advent Health, at our 50-some hospitals, we'll deliver about 38,000 babies, 38,000 live births. We will perform somewhere around 20 pregnancy terminations. Out of those 20 pregnancy terminations, about 18 of them will be for a fetal condition incompatible with life outside the womb. The other 2 will be for an imminent threat to the life of the mother. So about a year ago now, we came to understand, and I don't know why we hadn't figured this out before, but that there at our hospitals that do OB, they don't all do OB, but out of the 40 or 45 that do OB, each of them had their own policies for termination of pregnancy. Now, there was a lot of similarity, but they all had their own policies. And we thought that with the company as big as it is, that we should try to get a uniform policy that would describe the way we will relate to this issue. This is what we got. It's about 2 pages plus a few definitions on the 3rd page. What I'd like for you to do is take 5 minutes and each of you just read that document. As you read it, think about what questions it might raise for you, what issues you might see that maybe we've overlooked or didn't address. Just read it, and then let's talk. Frances has it memorized. She's going to do Wordle on her phone while we're all reading. Okay, looks like a number of you are finishing up. What do you see in this document that you like or you don't like, or we missed that, or we overlooked something else, or we should modify this, that, or the other? And understand that this may have to be totally rewritten depending on the Supreme Court's ruling in the next, it'll have to be in the next few days. It's already out there. Somebody, yes, Dave.
So, reading the first page, one thing that came to mind, I remember going to a conference with Robert Orr. Fertility docs will fertilize many eggs,
Yep.
and then they'll do fetal reduction surgeries.
Yep.
Now, here you're saying it can't be performed for gender, et cetera, but they will reduce the fetuses to a number that they think they can be successful.
Yeah.
So is there any kind of policy with Advent Health as far as, their policy was we will only do like maybe up to 3 and that would be handleable. Is there anything like that with Advent Health?
I know I've not worked on one. Francis, do you know? I don't think we have one.
Because fetal reduction is still an abortion.
A lot of that takes place in the outpatient setting. Yeah, in physician offices. So, and they aren't physicians that are employed by us. So, a lot of and that may be why we've never done a policy on it, because it doesn't come to us. Where it can be a little ticklish, and you would know about this, Eric. Say that we have a hospital with a group of OBGYN docs who have a big private practice, They're not employed by us. They're on our staff to deliver their babies and do their surgeries. But in their office, they do a fertility program. Are we responsible for that? That's a real story, right? So that is a challenge, and it does get noticed.
I just remember that situation. I was reading the policy.
Yeah.
In Catholic healthcare, so I know in Catholic healthcare, if you have privileges at their hospital, you can't do it.
You cannot.
You cannot,
Right.
and or they'll sever the relationship with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not surprised, and that's not critical. It's just descriptive of their view of conception and life and when it occurs. Yeah.
Do I need the microphone?
Well, so it'll be recorded.
Joyce, you can fill in what I might be missing here. So our policy materially is very similar to this one, but our political reality in California and Oregon and Hawaii is quite different, at least than Florida, where in the last 6 months, I've tried to help weigh in on queries from a journalist out of UCLA, journalist out of the Bay Area, California government types, because their concern is precisely the opposite as the one you're describing with the church. And so, while materially just reading this policy, some of the language is different, is as you might imagine quite similar. The being stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of communicating the policy is a real spot, at least that I keep finding myself in. And our chief medical officer, Arby Nahapeti, and I just had to look at a series of freighted questions, I'll put it that way, freighted with intent to do us some damage, and very specific clinical questions that were asked by someone who clearly had in mind exposing us for being a company that takes an awful lot of government money but doesn't provide for women's health. So I just raised that. It wouldn't surprise anyone in this room, and Joyce, you can add, but we're in a situation where I wake up a little bit more nervous about the questions that are going to come from that perspective than even the church perspective, and puts us in a position of really leaning towards protecting the privacy and the sanctity of a relationship between a physician and a patient, which is a place, which is not a dodge, but it is a place of saying again and again, we respect that relationship. So Joyce, you can correct or amend anything I said.
I'll add. There's nothing to correct. I will add, we sometimes have to avoid getting canceled for taking a position that would be unpopular in those states. And Alex is right, it's not a dodge, but it's not something that we need to opine about. We just say, this isn't a service that we offer. I'd be surprised, though, if there wasn't a physician office that was offering the service and we don't know about it. And they don't work for us, and they're probably in one of our buildings. And it's not a don't ask, don't tell. It's a privacy of the relationship between a woman, her physician, and her God that we're respecting. But we have to be very careful how we answer these questions, because you can get canceled real quickly.
I'll come to you, Francis. We think about this in a number of arenas, actually. We've just been working on a paper on clinical Sabbath observance. What will we not do or provide on Sabbath? And when we are as big as we are, for any of the systems represented in this room, there will likely be communities where we're the sole provider. We're it. 24/7, we're it. How can we deny a mother who brings her children into our urgent care center on Sabbath for their school physicals because she works Sunday through Friday and her kids can't go to school till they get their fit? How can we not do that? If we're not the sole provider, I mean, here in Orlando, we have, I don't know exactly now, 51% of the market in a 2.5 million population market. How do we not care for those million people 24/7? So, you had a comment.
Ox in the ditch parable.
Okay, ox in the ditch.
Ox in the ditch, the Sabbath parable. I have 3 different questions. We'd love your clarification that our ethics and that our termination of pregnancy, process would like clarity on. The first one where it says B, it says the standard approval process not required when the interruption of pregnancy is deemed to be inevitable and emergent, like placenta abruption or maternal hemorrhage, but is to be retrospectively reviewed by the ethics committee within 5 to 7 days. The question has come up because this has occurred. What is the role of the ethics? Because we have a termination of pregnancy committee that reviews them before, and they either approve or don't approve, whether or not they meet the criteria. But this has already occurred. So is this more of a notification to the ethics committee, or is the ethics committee supposed to make some kind of, determination? Oh, maybe this didn't fit. Maybe you shouldn't have. Or is it really just thank you for letting us know? What's the purpose of the 5 to 7 retrospective review?
I think it touches on 2 of the 3 things you suggested. One is a record. The second is a required opportunity for reflective review. Did we make the right decision? Did we make it timely? Should we have thought about it differently? Was there appropriate consultation? So a reflective review. Did we do it right? If not, how would we change it?
So more of a reflective concept.
Yeah. Did you have another question?
Yes.
Okay.
Pregnancy may be terminated, as we really have these 3 memorized now, if the fetus has condition incompatible with life outside the womb. We struggle with that because we do have some very complex genetic neonatal abnormalities, but in looking at it, we were struggling with one recently, and the child may live for a few days, may live for a week or 2, and maybe if you send this patient and had this certain type of surgical intervention, they may live for a few weeks. So when it says incompatible with life outside the womb, our physicians are struggling with that, what that really means in a time frame. Because, some you say, okay, the literature says, there's 80% chance or there's 20% chance. And is there some parameters there?
Can I ask a question regarding that too? So
Yeah, Dave.
you quoted these.
Let's get you on this so that it'll get on recording.
So you quoted the statistics about the abortions that happened in our system.
Yeah.
Well, one was presented to my committee and really struggled with it in certain ways. It was a trisomy 18. I heard you guys talk about that. Had pretty complex cardiac malformations. And doing the research and consultation with our specialists, large majority of them will just abort on their own. But some will survive to birth. Some will live 2 days, maybe a week. And I'm looking at 2 ways. First is how much life is valuable. Is 2 days worth living or not? Are we the ones that can judge that? But then the other side of me is I'm a daddy. I have a wife. I have kids. I could not even put myself in the place of that couple who would know that their newborn would inevitably die in 48 hours. How do you put Christian charity? How do you deny that to them? So I'm confident we made the right decision because it was incompatible with life. yeah, maybe we can maintain them on machinery to keep them alive longer, but they're totally dependent on it, and it's inevitably a life-ending condition. But still kind of troubled, because how much of life is not valued? Whether it's 2 days of life, is that good? 2 weeks? I've also had women who had fetal demise. I watched them go through a birth, knowing that that baby's coming out dead. That's a horrific thing. So that's my question or perspective.
Who would like to weigh in on that?
So tell me if I'm reading this right, but under Roman numeral 3, it seems that it addresses that to me as an obstetrician, because I have to, per policy, have a detailed discussion with the patient, give them the options. So it seems that that would include in that situation, give them the option to go through with the pregnancy. Baby could live for a couple weeks. We don't have any documentation of any graduating from high school or living that long. And so it's really up to you, and we're here to support you. It seems that's how I read this, and so it doesn't seem like it's boxing me in as an obstetrician that I have to do the termination. Yeah, so that's all I'd say about that.
Yeah, and that's where I would have gone too, Eric. This really is subject to the parent's desire, particularly the mother's desire, but the parent's desire. I told the group yesterday that the biggest change in obstetrics since I went to school and did obstetrics for a few years, that the biggest change since then is that then men did not get pregnant. Today, one after another, I hear them say, we're pregnant. We're pregnant. I bet they didn't have morning sickness. I bet the dot didn't turn blue when they peed on it. I bet they didn't have a C-section, but they're pregnant. We're pregnant. Now, there's a change in medicine in a short period of time for men to experience pregnancy. Yes.
Well, you know,
Here you go, Dennis. You got to have this.
Ted, it is true and humorous what you say, but I think there's a kernel of a nugget of helpful truth there, because the "we are pregnant" phenomenon points to kind of, there's a little moral community, you know, and it now encompasses the dad, apparently, and I think that's good for the most part, and there might even be a wider moral community beyond that, right? Because mom or somebody, you know, I mean, it's like we're pregnant implies that this is kind of, the mother's is central, obviously, for biological reasons, but there really is a network of people with moral standing and with a degree of connectedness spiritually, emotionally, morally. And I think that to the question of our 2 days of survival worthwhile, clearly there is worth there. In fact, there is great worth there. But when you balance it against either the pain of that infant that's going to be living those 2 days or however many days, and the pain of the mother, as well as the network of connected, morally connected, emotionally connected individuals around her and that fetus, who is in fact to determine which outweighs which. And I would say when we take the locus of determination far afield from that moral network, and now you move it to the state legislature, or you move it even to an ethics committee, you really run the danger of minimizing or ignoring the folks you should really be starting the conversation with, right? That's the danger I feel, because that question is an important one. You weigh those several days of survival. We know there's great worth in every moment of human life, but we also know that there are decisions have to be made where you weigh the pain and suffering, and we ought to start the conversation in the right place. choice.
Thank you. I'm not a clinician, and so some of the things that I wonder are truly wondering, not opining. I wonder if someone who was arguing for those 2 days or 1 week or 6 weeks or whatever it was of life, if you applied all of the same arguments about the value of that time, how would that apply to the end of life in a hospice situation? And why would that be different if what we're talking about is sanctity of life?
Ted, I was just saying this because this was presented to our ethics committee. So myself as a chair, it's like, I went back between me and Alfred, our own personal beliefs about abortion, then how much value does a limited amount of life have versus just the pain and suffering that the parents would have. This already went past the OB and came to me. I still believe we made the right decision. I'm comfortable with the decision. But, to your point, how do we, we're at this ethics conference, so other physicians in this role, how are we comfortable with decisions we make?
I know that some of you must have been at this conference, would it have been 3 years ago? And you may have to help me with the name, Dennis. Bob McLaughlin? Bob?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah, that's him.
Dr. Bob McLaughlin?
Mm-hmm.
He's now in
Macaulay.
Yes, that's it. You helped us. Okay, thank you, Mary Jane. Wonderfully bright physician. Has thought about and written about ethics and healthcare. I don't know, is he a neonatologist?
He's a pediatric hospice. He's a pediatrician, I believe, in pediatric hospice. Is that right, Mary Jane?
Palliative care.
Pediatric palliative care.
Palliative care.
So some of you may remember the story he told, and it's not directly on target, Dave, to what you brought up, but it's just one of the most touching, impactful stories I've ever heard. And he tells about being called to the delivery room for a young woman giving birth to 2 very premature infants. And it seems as though there was some anomalies that they had as well. I don't remember the details, but it was clear that without significant invasive and potentially painful measures, these babies wouldn't live even hours. And so the mom's there and the dad's there, and Bob is in some angst about how to talk with them, how to relate to them. Ultimately, he said, he went to the mom and the dad there in the delivery room and said, your babies are very small and are not at all likely to survive even hours. Perhaps a little longer if we do procedures that may be invasive and painful. He said, would you rather have us pull out all the stops, or would you rather hold your 2 babies for their entire lives? I'll never forget that.
Wow.
Yes, Jonathan, and then Mark.
So I have a cousin who had I'm trying to think of the right word now, premature baby, and they decided that they did everything for survival, but developmentally they never quite fully developed intellectually, and that's put a real pressure upon that family. And now that they had a second child and they've grown up, and is that going to become the burden for them when they pass on? increasingly more violent, increasingly more reclusive. Sometimes we have the sanctity of life in one area, but quality of life and other factors. It's just very complex. And I just look at the strain it's put on that relationship of my cousin whose husband wants, them to put her into care so that they don't have to deal with her anymore and walk away from it.
Yeah. Pass it to Mark.
Actually, Ted, I can resonate with the story you just told personally. I was in college at Oakwood, and my wife delivered at 27 weeks. And we were told prior to the delivery that our little boy just was not going to make it. And we did not have the means in terms of, health insurance and all of that to demand that they pull out all the stops. And, so we took the option that we would just hold our son. And so we did that for a few hours and just watched him slip away as we held him. It was painful, but his mother and I are grateful that we had the opportunity to hold him for his whole life. And that brought us great comfort. We still tear up when we think about it, but then we also have the blessed hope that, we'll see him again and maybe have an opportunity to raise him in a place where there's no suffering. So it's important to give a parent that choice if that choice is available.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark.
I'd like to go back to one thing you said about we're pregnant and give you my perspective.
Okay.
I was,
Here we go.
He often asks me if I want to consult with him.
So I trained at Bethesda Naval Hospital. It's primarily a cancer hospital for GYN cancer, but so we didn't get quite enough deliveries, so we were sent down to Camp Lejeune, all of us for 2 or 3 months, and in those 2 months you can get about over 100 deliveries, and so the Marines are very prolific, and the Marines, what I found is that they felt that they owned their wife. And so they were pregnant, but she would do whatever he said. And I felt that my patient was the mother, not the father. And the sanctity of everything there is with her. That doesn't mean that he's not very important. And there's a part of me that says it's great in a healthy relationship that we're pregnant. Want the father to be invested, obviously, but I still think the mother makes the choice in every aspect of the care. And so I felt that was pretty important. The other point I'll make is about the review afterwards. I think that's important because in my experience with Catholic healthcare, both as a practicing obstetrician and worked at a Catholic hospital in addition to a community hospital. And now in my role at Centura Health and working with on the Catholic side, I know that gynecologists, obstetricians will not, well, how do I say it? So you've got these rules by the Catholic Church that you don't think mean anything to you. So you want to do a tubal ligation, say, after delivery. You can't do that in the Catholic hospital. Yep. So I never did this, but I know obstetricians that did. They'd have what I'd call a phony indication to do a hysterectomy. So that she, has a sterilization procedure. So I think that we can skirt some of the policies as much as we can, thinking that we're doing it for the best interest of the patient. And so I think it's worth reviewing those cases afterwards, and I'd call that an audit that, the Catholic hospitals do quite a bit, an audit.
Carry it over to side. I'll come back to you, Alex.
Ted, I just wanted to shift the conversation a little. It's very personal and very moving, and it's probably an easy answer, but the last part of Section 2 says, no abortion shall be done at an Advent health facility in violation of state law. With some of the laws that are being passed by the state, no abortion for rape, etc., etc. How do you think we will survive? What's your best guess? Because I think this is something coming down the pike that we as a system may have to deal with in terms of the 3 criteria that are here.
I'm going to pass that to Frances because she's working on that very issue as we speak.
Yeah. In the state of Florida, July 1, there's a new new termination of pregnancy revised law. And right now, the process is if you're greater than, and they've lowered the gestation age, that ACOG has, it's 24 weeks and greater, you're considered third trimester here in the state of Florida. And only if the life of the mother is at risk can you, for third trimester, do, and it actually reflects what we're saying here. 2 doctors need to certify it. If not, you don't have time 1. But what they're starting July 1 at 15 weeks, that you cannot terminate a pregnancy unless either 1, the life of the mother is at risk, which has to be certified by 2 doctors if you have time, if not 1, or the 15-week gestation or greater has a fatal fetal abnormality, and it does not apply once they reach viability. And they actually have a definition for fatal fetal abnormality, which is tighter than this, and it's a little more descriptive. So, and it does not include rape. So up to 15 weeks, we're going to be using this process, and 15 weeks and greater, because we have to use the most conservative, we'll be following the Florida statute, which does not include rape, documented rape, on that. But I'm still curious about this first one, incompatible with life outside the womb. So mom and dad, we'll just say mom and dad, they've decided they do want to terminate, but then the question is this truly incompatible with life outside the womb? That piece and what that really means, and I don't know if we want to.
Well, it's extremely challenging. Today, we have, and almost daily, we have better diagnostic tools. Imaging, genetic testing, all sorts of things that Eric didn't have nearly as much access to 10, 15 years ago. So we get these diagnoses, and we're asked to prognosticate. What is that going to mean? Will this baby survive? Will it live a day? Will it live 2 weeks? Will it not live at all? We still don't know. And making those kinds of guesses, albeit educated guesses, is fraught with the opportunity for a mistake. That's going to be really tough. Let me get Alex. You had your hand up before I walked across the room.
I did. I'm going to move us in yet another direction. It seems like that's been the theme here that we've. So I'm not a clinician. I have not been pregnant. I was very good with a couple colicky babies along the way, I'll say, and some late night stuff. But yeah, Mark, you made me think about years of infertility that my wife and I went through, which is another piece that will stick with us forever, those experiences. But I am a theologian, and you frame this conversation from a theological versus practical. So I want to take you back there for a second. And Francis' comment, actually, you got me thinking about this. The sheep in the ditch story in Matthew 11, first of all, on the Sabbath. Do you know what the condition of the person was that Jesus was addressing? A shriveled hand. So actually, the comparison is not there, by the way, in terms of Sabbath policy. The comparison is not between an emergent situation with an animal versus a human. It's an emergency situation, animal, compared to a non-emergent clinical intervention with a person. So it's even more dramatic. So ox in the ditch, you're correct, Francis, that's in Luke. But the more significant, or the greater push is in Matthew, where it's an argument for non-emergent clinical intervention that may not even been an issue of pain either. So I just think that was interesting. A prelude to your point in the beginning, I'm not quite willing to cede, Ted, and I don't think you actually are either, that the Bible really, you didn't say this, but I'm going to put words, I'm going to push it, that the scriptures really can't help us here, and that the BRI, they got to say what they got to say, but ultimately we have practical concerns that we need to address. The BRI, with all due respect, and I do respect them, and I have engaged, by the way, that the probably similar 7 folks there on other issues, they do not have the ability to be the final word on this. I think there are rich theological perspectives that would honor the entirety of this conversation right here. And I think that we should not give ground. Perhaps we will have to from an ecclesiastic perspective or from a political perspective in the church. But I am not willing to give ground that the teachings of Jesus and the testimony of Scripture sits with the interpretations of that group. And I think that we have theological work that we need to do as health systems, not merely clinical and practical work. Otherwise, I do think we find ourselves in this difficult spot where those that hold the keys to theological perspectives, we kind of allow them to be at odds with, well, we have to make these practical, decisions. And I'm not arguing that we should simply build theologies out of practical circumstances. I think there's risk to that, but I think we have hard and important work that we constantly need to do about bringing to light the heart of Jesus in these matters and do that good work as well as the careful clinical work. So I'm not quite willing at all to concede theological opinion to a group of, I'm going to assume all those were men. I'm going to assume that the whole BRI was male, maybe with one exception.
One woman, I think.
Okay. I'm not willing to cede theological perspective to that group. I'll just finish by saying that. I don't think we should cede that ground. And I think the health systems, I'll say one more. I said I was going to leave it, but I'm not. We need to be doing theology. I'll put it that way. That is born out of the context that God has given us. And you were introduced this morning by Joyce as a pastor and a clinician, and I think you have bridged that gap. But I think that work has to be what we do along with the practical work. So, and I think that feeds into the way that you framed up the conversation.
Thank you, Alex. I want to change the discussion again just a little bit for the last 15 minutes or so that we have to think about what if, as we anticipate, Roe versus Wade is annulled. So I'll tell a story. Some of you have heard it already. Some years ago, when I was working at Loma Linda, this would have been in the late 80s, Dr. Alan King was chair of the Department of OBGYN at Loma Linda. And I recall asking him one day, so Roe versus Wade had been in effect for like 13, 14 years by then. And I asked him, tell me about your thinking on elective abortion. And he said, I was in my residency training at a county hospital, he didn't tell me which one, before Roe versus Wade. And Friday night in the emergency room was hell for an OB resident. These young women got paid, had their back alley abortions, came into the emergency department bleeding with their insides macerated, infected. He said, I never want to go back to those days. I never want to go back to those days. Now, who knows what the Supreme Court decision will do and what the ramifications will be. But the truth is that since abortions became technically feasible, women with means have been able to get safe ones. And women without means have had to get them wherever they could, with the kinds of results that Dr. King was talking about. How should we, as faith-based medical institutions, even as churched people, relate to a situation that goes back to the days before Roe versus Wade? How do we live redemptively in that kind of world? I'd like to hear some thinking about that, because we may be facing it in weeks. Who takes care of these girls? Who holds them? Who comforts them? Who treats them?
I don't have an answer to that. I served 3 years in the Philippines, and it's a Catholic country, and no abortions. And I was afraid I was going to be flunking my oral boards when I was asked, why do you do so many what they saw as therapeutic abortions? And said, well, they came in with infected, in pain, had been, back alley botched abortion. And I mean, that's what else am I supposed to do? And so I've always been, I feel like I'm pro-life. And so I hate that term, pro-life versus the other. And but I'm pro-life at the end of life. I'm pro-life in the middle of life, and I'm pro-life at the beginning. And sometimes I never did abortions, but I certainly supported the right because of my own personal experience. And so I would be very fearful that we would end up in situations like that, and there's a lot of suffering. There was a gynecologist in my town who did abortions, the only one in town, but he also had, by the time of his death, they'd had somewhere around 200 foster kids, and he had volunteered for obstetrical care. All the OB care he did was free for that population. And yet in the middle of the night, I got a call from one of my patients to tell me how thrilled they were that they called Dr. Ragsdale and preached to him for an hour about Jesus. And I thought, so why are you calling me? And when I saw him a couple of days later, I said, by the way, I just want to apologize for my patient calling you in the middle of the night. He said, I didn't get it. I must have dropped the phone. I get those calls all the time. His kids were picketed at their school, and they picketed in front of his house. So I'm afraid.
In the name of Jesus.
In the name of Jesus. So I'm afraid for where we're at. I'm conflicted because I'm not pro-abortion, and yet I am pro-life, pro-choice.
Me too.
So.
And it was really that story by Alan King that started my journey there.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Yeah, just to take it down a slightly different track, we're prepared to make legislation about issues of pro-life and abortion and other factors, but we're not really prepared to make legislation or policy or change the drivers that drive many of the young girls into the issues where they develop teen pregnancies and other factors. I think, we want to have a voice at one end, but we're not willing to actually address the driving factors that cause some of those issues. And we all know that there is, poverty is a high risk factor for teen pregnancies. But we're not actually addressing those issues. Maybe we should actually put some energy into the prevention side of things if we want to be so judgmental at this point.
I've heard from a lot of men in this thing. I have forced the microphone upon Francis a couple of times. I'd really like to hear from some of the women. I heard from Joyce a bit. Anybody else want to chime in?
Hello, I'm Sandra. I'm from New Smyrna Beach. I'd like to point on to what Jonathan just said, where let's get into the schools. Talk to the physical education, get that on their agenda. I know they do a lot of worksheets on the second half of the year in Volusia County. My son's complaining all about it. He just wants to go play basketball, but they're actually doing work. And I think if we get to them, it may avoid a lot of the pregnancies in teens. But we do have a problem. If Roe versus Wade really does go away, we just have to be there for those patients who have the back alleys. We have to be there for them and welcome them and pray with them. So
And love them.
that's all we can do.
I think Francis has a hand.
And then Mark.
I think we should also consider that there may be more children born, that they won't be aborted. Personal experience, my mother was pregnant with number 3, I'm number 4, and was in a lot of financial issues, and she went to a back alley abortion clinic, sat there in the waiting room and waited. She decided not to, walked off, and we have my sister and we have me. Mm-hmm. So one thing I do appreciate with our law here in Florida that some people may not like, but I have a different perspective because of my life. My sister and I are here because my mom chose to go through and went through really rough times in her marriage and financial, but we're here. And we were almost given up for adoption and everything through our early childhood. And one thing that in the state of Florida is that prior to 24 hours of termination, abortion, whatever term we want to use, that it is required for the physician to provide informed consent. And it can't be done right at the time of the termination, but at least 24 hours. And there's no window. It can be done weeks ahead. And at that time, part of the informed consent process is to offer an ultrasound and to offer for them to view the ultrasound and to see what that ultrasound is about. Also, we're required to give them the Department of Health education material. And what it says alternatives to abortion. It actually has pictures of what your baby looks like at every week, because some people have no idea. And also gave alternatives and support systems and structures. And I think a real big thing we can do is offer, and I know I'm concerned about the backline, I'm so right there with you, but I mean, is to give the opposite, the gift of life. I mean, I bounce between pro-life and pro-choice. I'm really both because I believe in the individual. However, I do believe that if we support these women, if we show them what support is out there and what there can be, and there's option of adoption, that is out there. And I don't think we promote that enough, that, we're here for, when you think of it today, there's WIC programs, if you're single or whatever, having a child, there's so many programs that'll help you pay. You got your Medicaid, you got your WIC, you got your all kinds of finances. And I'm not so sure everybody knows about that. So I think we need to get that out there, that there is life is precious. And when I think of New York, where they let 3rd trimester abortions occur, I'm appalled. And I think that, we have to value life. And when does life begin is always the ethical question.
Oh. I wanted to speak to your comment and say that I can vouch for the efficacy of education. I worked in Kansas City for 9 years, and Kansas City, Kansas scores almost the lowest on every community health measure that there is. And also scores low on high school dropouts and things like that, and high in teen pregnancy. And we did an initiative in the schools with young girls who we walked through it was Creation Health at the time. We walked them through Creation Health, and we taught them about all of the various elements of Creation Health. And the program was about a year long. And I can't remember the pregnancy rate among teenagers in Kansas City. It was pretty high. But only one of the girls in our program during the time of the program got pregnant. So we weren't teaching them about abstinence and sexual hygiene and all that kind of stuff. We were just teaching them about valuing themselves as people. And that helped to prevent a lot of other pregnancies. So it can work.
Right next to you.
So I'm not a clinician, but I am actually a prevention expert. So without taking us down this rabbit warren, I think sometimes if you look at prevention, it's a jigsaw puzzle and there's many pieces. We tend to overemphasize the educational piece. Because because it's easy. I can tell you something. I've done my job. If you do it, it's your fault because I told you what to do and you didn't do it. I suspect that really it was the community that you developed in that year-long relationship with those girls. If you look at the research by Douglas Kirby, who passed away a few years ago, but was really the world leading researcher in adolescent sexuality, of all the empirical research that he looked at, and he used to post summative data quite regularly, community service was actually the only one he could show through empirical research that was preventative. And that was linked to the fact that kids found they had a sense of value, that when they served somebody else, they found value within themselves, so they're inclined to give themselves away. So it is a very complex sort of thing when we look at the whole prevention element of it all, and there's many different pieces to it. But, you know, for having been a health director for the South Pacific Division, I can tell you that the Adventist Church has a real tendency towards health education, not health promotion, and that information is meant to change behavior, and information is fairly ineffective in isolation. The relationship that the person has with the one who introduced the relationship is more powerful than the information that they gave.
Yeah.
Yes. Carlisle.
Thank you. Just to tag on to what Jonathan just said, I have a 31-year-old daughter, graduate of Andrews, who lives in Pittsburgh on Liberty Avenue, Main Street, downtown. She's a proud homeowner there, loves living there, and lives 2 blocks from a Planned Parenthood office. And there are times where she has to literally fight her way through the crowd of screaming Christians who are there yelling at the women and the couples on their way to the Planned Parenthood office. And she's a part of a large Facebook group with a lot of our former pastors and professors. And she decided one day, and I'm paraphrasing what she posted, but she basically said, you know, every day I have to fight my way through the crowd of folks screaming at individuals on their way to Planned Parenthood. I just ask myself the question, where would my Jesus be? And I know it's not in that screaming crowd, but it's holding that woman's hand on her way to Planned Parenthood. And the vilification that she received from pastors and theologians, you know, are you saying that Jesus is a baby killer? And I'm sharing that story because there is such ignorance among our Christian, and dare I say, Seventh-day Adventist population on what happens at a Planned Parenthood office. They think you go there to have an abortion. So many other things happen at a Planned Parenthood office. And I would challenge us, and this may be dangerous, but there is an opportunity, if we're courageous enough and take courage over convenience, as Brene Brown says, to partner with Planned Parenthood offices to assist and educate individuals in need in our population.
Thank you, Carlisle. Just two more comments. I'm going to get the one behind you, Mark, and you be putting it together, bud, because you're bringing up you are the finale.
I want to take a slightly different approach to this situation. I think that being in the Adventist Church my entire life, I'm a PK, born and raised in this denomination. I'm going to get emotional. We are so strong and so quick in saying being pro-life. But how many of us are willing to take in that young lady into our home who doesn't have any support, doesn't have any means of finances, and doesn't want to make this decision to necessarily abort her child, but doesn't see any other way out? And I remember a story that I was told in a conference like this of a lady in a church who had a lady such as this, a young girl who didn't have any family, and she said, and was struggling with this decision: do I keep my baby? Do I go through an abortion or termination? And she said, I will let you make that choice. This is your choice to make. But while through this series, why don't you come to my home? Let's look into the different school programs. She wanted to go to school. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to do all these things. She said, how about you come, live in my home? I have an apartment in my basement. We'll support you. We'll feed you, all of these things. And at the end of the day, she decided to choose the baby. And that member of that church took care of that child, helped raise that child while she went to classes in the nights, while she went to college. I mean, how many of us are willing to say, yes, pro-life, but I will go the extra mile. I will, help the foster care system, become a foster parent, or do these extra miles in which we know these situations end up sometimes in. And we're foster parents in Columbus, Ohio, Franklin County, and I'll tell you that I've learned so much being part of that system, so much about the families and the children. And I'll tell you what I've learned here as a Christian in being part of that system is that the number one demographic of individuals who are foster parents, can anybody guess? Are transgender parents. They're the number one demographic of foster parents because they know what it's like to not have anybody. They know what it's like to not be loved and not have belonging. And I think that as a church, if we took the call seriously to be Jesus' feet, we would be in those spaces more.
Thank you, Karen. Mark, see if you can beat that.
Ted, you made a mistake. Yes, I wasn't supposed to be the last one. But to go off what was just said, I think too often we, or maybe it's easy for us to play God and great ideas about education, preventative measures. I feel like this is highly politicized as well, and maybe that creates a lot of struggles in our society, that we want to play God and we want to use it for our political purposes as human beings to push crowds one way or another. So maybe there's an opportunity to develop some strategies or something to try to depoliticize this issue. And maybe it's never possible, and maybe it's an aspirational statement, but in my opinion, it's worth a try. And just to maybe paint the picture or show the picture of all the things that happen with what it is at stake.
Ted, can I make one?
Sure, Dave.
So Mark made the comment that this is politicized and et cetera, but when I first started in practice, I started out and HMOs were very predominant. And, you know, people would come and they would want me to sign a referral to allow the abortion. And, you know, I wouldn't do it. And I'd go through all the different options about adoption, and I would purposely take the ultrasound and have them hear the fetal heart tones so they know it's just not a cross, it's actually a beating heart. And then they'd be like, well, how can you be so involved in this? It's my baby. But you asked for my signature on that form for me. I wouldn't say that, but you asked for my signature on this form for this child to die. So it's important that we involve the people. We talk to the kids. We have to talk to the parents too. I'll do a lot of HIV prevention education in my office, and sometimes I get kickbacks from the parents like, well, that's stupid. Why would you even talk about abstinence? That'll never happen. They're handing out condoms to their kids as they're going out the door. We need to have a different expectation. If we don't expect that they're going to be abstinent, then they never will be. So we have to work with the parents and the kids and set a new paradigm.
So thank you all for your participation. I think our time is up.
Yeah,
Is it not up?
Yeah, we're 5 minutes
So here's a last little tidbit for you. This is an answer to a question for you. So the calls I've gotten lately, and there's not been a lot of them, but I've been asked on more than one occasion, do your doctors prescribe morning after pills? Well, the honest truth is I don't know, but I did a little research on it, and the truth is that most everywhere in this country, they're available over the counter. So you can answer that question by saying the point is moot. All they have to do is walk in the drugstore and ask for them, and they get them. So there you go. Thank you for your participation.